preview the vice presidential debate. I'm now joined by the SABC's New York correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who you've just seen there in that piece. We've also got Nick Harper, who's our correspondent in Washington D.C, and Dr. Krista Johnson, who's an associate professor and director of the Center for African Studies at Howard University in Washington D.C. She's a political scientist whose work has focused largely on African politics and health politics in Africa and the diaspora. I'm also joined in studio here in Johannesburg by our foreign editor at the SABC, Sophie Mokoena. To all of you, thanks very much indeed for joining us. And perhaps let me start in New York with Sherwin. Sherwin, thanks very much indeed for joining us. You've been busy unpacking what's been happening the last few days, and a lot of talk ahead of this debate. And I guess a question that a lot of people might have on their minds is what's been happening in New York and kind of building up towards this debate?
Well, I think not only in New York, I think around the country, a great deal of anticipation ahead of this vice presidential debate, Peter. Given the historic nature on the one end of Kamala Harris's nomination, her candidacy here, and making history as the third female to participate in the vice presidential debate, but the first female of South Indian and of African-American descent in the United States. So history aside, this is also a very important political moment in the United States, just given what's happened over the last week, right? A president that has been infected with COVID-19, the subsequent infections that we've seen in his orbit associated with the White House that continues to grow daily, and also with, as a canvas here, the 210,000 Americans and the plus 7 million Americans so the 210,000 Americans who have died and perished from COVID-19, and the over 7 million infections that this country is grappling with. This is a strange moment that has really provided a great deal of impetus to this debate, given what they called the dumpster fire debate we saw in Cleveland, Ohio last Tuesday. People are looking for substance, and of course a lot of work here for the Trump-Pence campaign to do. A number of polling numbers have come out in recent days. One from NBC Wall Street giving the Biden-Harris camp a 14-point national lead, and then subsequently a CNN poll that gave them a 16-point lead. We've also just seen Quinnipiac University come up with a few numbers where you are seeing Joe Biden stretching his lead in the key battleground states, including the must-get state for Republicans of Florida. So what you should expect, given these numbers that we're seeing, is Mike Pence will be the attack dog, and of course that will be essentially for an audience of one imagines. Peter?
All right, okay, we're going to chat a little bit about what these vice presidential candidates will be doing in terms of the job that they need to do for their candidates. But let's go to Washington and join Nick Harper. Nick, Donald Trump, Washington, but we haven't seen him for the past 2 days. What's the talk about this man who stood in front of the White House when he came back from the medical center and was quite defiant, but whilst he tweets, he's not visible? What's that telling us?
That's right, Peter. Yeah, it's about 48 hours nearly since we saw President Trump returning from Walter Reed Medical Center, walking up the steps at the back of the White House and giving a salute. Very defiant there as he took off his mask and entered the White House. But he hasn't been seen since. But he has been very active on Twitter. Lots of tweets urging people to vote, attacking the media, attacking the Democrats, and also, surprisingly, announcing just yesterday that he was calling off all negotiations on the stimulus bill with the Democrats. Now, throughout, the Republicans have pushed that it's the Democrats that have been standing in the way of negotiations. By pulling out of that, it rather changes the narrative. He says that if and when he is re-elected, his words, he will get involved in trying to get that stimulus bill through. But it certainly throws into jeopardy those relief checks that many millions of Americans were hoping for during this difficult economic time. The number of tweets that we've seen from the president seems to suggest suggest that he is perhaps a little bit frustrated. Maybe there's some cabin fever setting in, feeling like a caged tiger. We've seen this type of behavior from the president before, when he is in the White House, unable to interact with the public, unable to go out and about to meet people, to hold rallies. He often resorts to Twitter, and we see a real kind of Twitter storm, a constant flow of tweets when that frustration sets in. So certainly he has been public in quiet in one sense, but very public in others. And we're waiting to see whether we will see the president at any time soon. But we have heard from his doctor in the last few hours, who says that he is doing well and that he's been fever-free for the last few days, and therefore is very much improving when it comes to those COVID-19 symptoms.
All right, so whilst all of this is playing out, of course, there are two people that are going to be going head-to-head a little bit later on. Let me ask Dr. Krista Johnson to give us a sense of the candidates. And I know that one of them has been to your university, Dr. Johnson. Hello, Dr. Krista Johnson?
I apologize. I was saying, yes, as a Howard faculty member, of course, our campus is abuzz if we were there in person with Kamala Harris being nominated as the vice presidential pick. She's also, I think she really has very much riled up the African-American base of the Democratic Party. She's has a number of ties with not just Howard University, but the AKA Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, and all of the sororities and all of the fraternities, the Divine Nine as they're called, are really, I think, going all out to mobilize voters and to get our constituencies, the Democratic constituency, to the polls. So her background in some ways is somewhat different from Vice President Pence, obviously currently a senator from California, but has a prosecutorial background. So I think what we expect to see from her this evening is really someone who's just an excellent debater. Of course, the Democrats believe that she's going to win this debate. She certainly proved herself on the primary presidential campaign as an excellent debater, and certainly someone who can go toe to toe with just about anybody. I think for her, one of the challenges, again, is going to be perhaps to maybe tone down a bit of the prosecutorial and kind of, bulldog style and approach, and perhaps try and look a little bit more presidential. As you were saying in your opening piece, very much I think this vice presidential debate is more significant this year for two reasons. For one, because of the debacle of the presidential debate, which really lacked considerable substance. So people are looking for the two VPs to really lay out policy positions and to kind of distinguish the two party platforms. But the other issue, of course, is what we're talking about, not just COVID-19 and the health of the president, but also really the age of both of these presidential candidates. So Joe Biden is 77. There's a real possibility, if COVID is going to continue, even if he takes the White House in January, his health could be in jeopardy. So I think especially with President Trump contracting COVID in the last week, it has really, I think, shown a spotlight on that number two spot. So both Pence and Harris, I think, are going to have to come out and be really more presidential, but of course also try and promote the policies and the platform of the number one of the ticket, and really show how they're going to support their candidate. For Pence, I think his challenge, is greater in many respects. Pence is also a good debater, so I think he's going to come out and, he's going to be the one who's going to have to, I think, come out swinging, first. His demeanor is very calm and controlled and steady, so it'll be interesting to see how he, I think, tries to ramp that up a bit and become a little bit more animated, I guess, in some ways on the debate stage. But he also, I think, one element of that calm, steady demeanor also, people have I guess, painted him as really kind of Trump's yes man. He very rarely goes against the wishes and the opinions of Trump. So it's going to be hard. It was hard for him in 4 years ago when he was debating in the vice presidential debate there to support both then candidate Trump, but now President Trump, but also in some ways try and distinguish himself from his president. And of course, as Sherwin said, I think it is true that really in his case, he is debating for an audience of one. So he's going to have a real kind of tightrope balance to walk tonight.
All right, we'll explore a little bit more about personal brands of these two individuals just now. But I want to come back to Africa and speak to our foreign editor, Sophie Mokoena. And Africa's watching this. We've watched these elections in the past. We were very hopeful when Barack Obama, who had Kenyan roots, going into the White House. Now we see this black Asian woman on the ticket. What's in it for us as a continent?
Well, I think what is critical is to see whether today we'll hear something that's related to international relations or foreign policy, which I doubt, because when you look at what President Trump and Joe Biden did a week ago when they were debating, they didn't utter a word in terms of foreign policy. But I think it's still important for us on the continent and around the world to follow the debates, because at the end of the day, this is a global village, and America is one of the largest economy around the world. And we know very well that the trade between Africa and America is quite huge also, including South Africa. And therefore, I think it is indeed of interest to Africans on the continent, Africans in the diaspora. And having a woman being part of this important activity of ensuring that you see women standing up and taking their rightful position or challenging positions of power, it's quite fulfilling. I'm sure women around the world are looking forward for tonight to hear what Kamala Harris is going to say. And I think she is very fortunate in a sense that when you look at Joe Biden's corner, you have former President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, supporting them. And earlier on, President Trump, former President Barack Obama did send a message on Twitter indicating that many Americans should go out there and vote, and they should vote for Joe Biden. On the other hand, Michelle Obama has issued a video message also, or released a video message rallying Americans to go out and vote. And let's take a listen at what Michelle Obama had to say in her message to the Americans.
As a black woman who has, like the overwhelming majority of people of color in this nation, done everything in my power to live a life of dignity and service and honesty, the knowledge that any of my fellow Americans is more afraid of me than the chaos we are living through right now, well, that hurts. It hurts us all. It is a heaviness that sits on our hearts. So I want to appeal for some empathy here too. I want everyone who is still undecided to think about all those folks like me and my ancestors, the moms and dads who worked their fingers to the bone to raise their kids right, the teenagers who wear hoodies while working hard to get their diplomas, the millions of folks who look like me and fought and died and toiled as slaves and soldiers and laborers to help build this country. Put yourselves in our shoes for just a moment. Imagine how it feels to wake up every day and do your very best to uphold the values that this country claims to hold dear: truth, honor, decency, only to have those efforts met by scorn, not just by your fellow citizens, but by a sitting president.
Clearly a very powerful message there, and looking at President Trump at the time where he is recovering after he was diagnosed, or he was reported to have contracted the coronavirus, currently at the White House isolating himself, but continuing to engage in communication via Twitter. And the other important issue is to realize that many people at the White House have tested positive for coronavirus. You look at also the issue of the security, very senior security personnel who have tested positive for coronavirus also. And I think it's another problem for the Americans to see their president there helpless at the house, but he has to go out there and campaign. And you see people around him who have tested positive, quite a number of people. It speaks to how he was irresponsible in terms of the function that they had at the Rose Garden.
Sophie, thanks very much indeed. We'll continue to explore the Africa connection to these debates and the outcome of the American election. A lot of people may be asking themselves, actually, what is the job of the Vice President of America? And particularly with 4 weeks to go, one is a nominee, one is an incumbent. What are they doing in these 4 weeks ahead of an election? Well, Professor Joel Goldstein of the St. Louis University, who's a professor of law emeritus, gives us a few thoughts.
Vice presidential candidates really perform three sort of rhetorical roles, or three ways in which they contribute to the democratic discussion of campaigns. They tend to sound the themes of their ticket and of their campaign. Other than the presidential candidates, vice presidential candidates have really one of the most powerful microphones. And so part of what they do is to really echo the themes of the presidential candidate and the campaign. Secondly, they typically spend a lot of time explaining why the presidential candidate on their ticket is the best person to lead America through the next 4 years. And then the third characteristic vice presidential role is to attack the opposing ticket and to explain why its performance or its policies would not be in the United States' best interest.
So that's Professor Goldstein giving us a sense of what our VPs will be doing in the next 4 weeks as we go up towards the elections. Let's go to Sherwin in New York. Sherwin, so we get a sense of what the job at hand is for the next 4 weeks. But I suppose another thing that we can ask is, can they influence the elections at this stage of the game? These vice presidential candidates?
It's a very interesting question so late in this campaign. I mean, we are 27 days out of an election. I often make the argument, Peter, in these discussions that once the presidential election concluded in 2016, the 2020 election campaign began. And so people have literally had the last 3.5 years, even more than that now, to make their decision. So I would be very surprised if this moves the needle. We have seen the needle move somewhat since that first presidential debate in Cleveland, Ohio. And I do apologize, I have construction workers outside my window. So that's the humdrum that you hear in the background. So I would be very surprised if the vice presidential candidates are going to, turn this campaign on its head. Kamala Harris clearly has the advantage in this because she goes in there with a big lead nationally and leads in all the critical key states, swing states, including the big Florida, which is the must-get for any successful Republican campaign towards victory in the November election. So as to whether they move the needle, and perhaps Professor Johnson can weigh in here, I'm not sure there's much of a needle to move anymore, given just how long we've been at this.
Professor Johnson, let's take that to you, but also if you could expand.
I'm happy to jump in and just...
Go ahead. I'm not sure where Peter's gone, but go ahead, Professor Johnson.
Okay. I would totally agree with you. I don't think that there are too many people who are genuinely on the fence now. And I think, as Vice President Pence said, the contrast really couldn't be any greater in this debate. I think Kamala Harris also has an advantage because of really the events of the last week. So it seemed as though Trump and Pence might have been able to gain some momentum once the campaigning began to turn away from the coronavirus coronavirus and more towards the Supreme Court seats and more conservative values to kind of really rile up their base. Now that we're back in the COVID mode and, the health of the president, issues of national security around all of these people in the White House contracting coronavirus, I think the Democrats will be able to really put the spotlight back on healthcare and on COVID-19, which is, I think, also going to work in their favor.
All right. Nick Harper, what do we know about today's format? I know that there's plexiglass to protect the debaters, and that's an innovation. But is there anything else that's been introduced given what we saw and nearly heard last time?
That's right, Peter. Well, the Debates Commission seemed to be working much harder, really, to try and assuage the fears of both sides, but also reassure the people who will be there within the hall, including the moderator. So, yes, you mentioned the plexiglass. They will have that. Plastic barriers around both of the two candidates on the stage. Now, initially, Vice President Mike Pence pushed back against having plexiglass in front of him. He said it wouldn't look good if he appeared on national television with that barrier, but finally said that he would go ahead with that. They're being kept apart by just over 12 feet. They'll be sitting at desks a good distance from each other. And we're also told that all the members of the audience will be mandated to wear masks. Now, just over a week ago, when Joe Biden and President Trump debated, we saw people enter the room wearing masks, including President Trump's own children, but then quickly taking them off as they sat down to listen to the debate. We're told that anyone within that building at the time watching the debate will have to wear their masks throughout. That will certainly be a comfort, I imagine, to Kamala Harris. They've been pushing hard to make sure that those sort of precautions are in place.
All right, and let's come back here. Sophie, I can understand the excitement that we had around Barack Obama, but generally, are Africans intrigued by the American elections?
When you monitor what's happening on social media, you'll realize that Africans do follow the American elections. And the participation on social media indicates that there's huge interest in these elections. Again, we know that Donald Trump is a very colorful leader and charismatic leader, and people know him very well, and they follow what he is doing. And you look at following on social media, he has quite a huge following, and a number of those who are following Donald Trump are people from the continent, and therefore there's huge interest. You would see tonight when you look at the debate around 3 a.m. South African time, you will see people would be watching, and therefore there's huge interest in this election again of the President of the United States of America, but also in terms of what the future holds for America at a time where you see America is currently inward looking with that motto of President Trump, America First, and therefore it remains to be seen this time around whether he is going to change tact towards elections, or he will continue to be inward looking. And I think also coronavirus was a rude awakening call. It speaks to America is not an island. America is part of the global village, and therefore Americans must always be part of the multilateral organizations and also participate at multilateral level. But this was not the case last week during the United Nations General Assembly.
All right, Dr. Johnson, I want to come to you as we start to wrap things up. And I'm just wondering, again, the personal brand thing is a big thing for me in terms of trying to understand Mike Pence. We've been saying he's a yes man, but he was a governor, I believe, before. He had a profile. Is it possible for him to step out so that he can perhaps lay some groundwork for his own future post this election?
I think we haven't seen that of him yet. So I'd be surprised if he, like I said, I think he has a tightrope to walk, because I think certainly the Republican Party and the conservative base is looking for him to do that. I mean, even some of the positions that President Trump has taken in the last few days with regards to, for example, cutting or halting the negotiations with regards to a new stimulus bill with Democrats in Congress has not been particularly popular with a number of Republicans, because we know that that's going to hurt, of course, a majority of Americans. So I think that there's a hope that maybe he would do that. I mean, he certainly has, all of the conservative pedigree to really bring the Republican Party in some ways back to its old self, and kind of tout the issues that they have historically been known for. But I think we have also learned over these last 4 years that you are either supporting the positions of President Trump, or you may find yourself out of a job very quickly. So that's his challenge.
All right, Sherwin, we're running out of time, but I was just wondering, people have started voting. Long lines. What does that indicate? Is that bad news for Trump, or is it bad news for Biden? What's the sense? What are people saying?
Well, the experts often tell us that if there's a high turnout in a general election, that tends to favor Democrats. And so that a part of the news narrative in the United States, Peter, is that, Republican efforts to sort of drum down the vote, to make it very difficult. You'll hear this from Kamala Harris tonight. You heard it in that piece talking about how, the obstacles that are being put in place in various states for minority groups in this country to vote, in terms of ID, having to have certain ID checks, and who knows the list of things that Republicans are trying in terms of reducing the turnout. And so that's a big concern. That's why you're seeing long lines. We had the same complaints during the primaries earlier this year that determined who the nominees were going to be. But a high turnout is going to favor Democrats. But given that aside, the enthusiasm we are seeing around this country is based on the last 3.5 years. And I think based on the pandemic and how it has really disrupted economic life in this country, and the health implications that it has wrought in terms of minority groups in this country. So if you start seeing early turnout, you're seeing a lot of interest in terms of mail-in and absentee ballots. That trend is certainly, if that trend continues, I think it favors the Democrats in this election.
All right. And Sophie, very quickly, 30 seconds. What do you think might be the highlights for us to look out for in this debate coming up?
I think the body language, but also the entrance for me. I would want to see a situation where Kamala Harris is wearing a mask, but only remove a mask when she is speaking, to demonstrate to the world that during this pandemic, it is critical to continue to observe and implement the health protocols around COVID-19, lead by example. I expect Mike Pence not to wear a mask, because clearly looking at President Donald Trump's behavior, clearly people around him don't take the coronavirus seriously. But I expect Mike Pence to be very, very upfront and try to recover the lost ground based on what transpired a week ago or some few days ago, where the president was hospitalized and there was no time for them to really go out and campaign. And he is now perhaps almost like a sweeper. He has to do a very powerful job to pull together the pieces and ensure that the campaign is back on track, while Kamala Harris must demonstrate that she is up to the task, and also assist Joe Biden. When you look at age, really, it is a challenge.
All right, Sophie Mokoena, our foreign editor, thanks very much indeed. Nick Harper, our Washington correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, our New York correspondent, and special guest Dr. Krista Johnson, Associate Professor, Director, Center for African Studies at Howard University. To all of you, thank you so much. And I guess now we get out the popcorn, sit in front of those chairs and wait for it all to unfold. Thanks so much. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back to the continent, and of course elections are due in Tanzania on the 28th of October, and we'll be previewing that.